Picture this. You're exploring an ancient cave in the Judean desert in 1947, and you discover jars containing scrolls that have been hidden for nearly 2,000 years. As scholars carefully unroll these ancient documents, they realize they've found something extraordinary, not just biblical texts, but books that were supposed to have been destroyed forever. Among these forbidden treasures lies a text so dangerous that 4th century religious authorities orchestrated one of history's most successful cover-ups to eliminate it completely. This is the true story of the Book of Jubilees, an ancient scripture that church leaders deemed so threatening they systematically destroyed every copy they could find, erasing it so thoroughly from Western civilization that no Hebrew, Greek, or Latin versions survived. For over 1,400 years, this text remained lost to the world, its explosive revelations buried beneath centuries of religious censorship. But what made this book so dangerous that powerful religious institutions felt compelled to erase it from history? What hidden knowledge did it contain that challenged the very foundations of both Judaism and Christianity? And why, now that it has been miraculously rediscovered, do modern readers find its suppressed truths so irresistible? The answers to these questions reveal not just an ancient conspiracy, but a fascinating window into how religious authority actually works and what happens when that authority feels genuinely threatened. To understand the significance of what religious authorities tried to destroy, we need to first grasp just how extraordinary the Book of Jubilees actually was in the ancient world. Think of it this way. Imagine if someone today claimed to have discovered a complete unedited version of the Constitution that contained crucial sections the Founding Fathers had written, but that had been deliberately removed from the version we all know. That's essentially what the Book of Jubilees claimed to be. The full uncensored revelation that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai, containing vital information that the canonical Bible had supposedly omitted or obscured. This wasn't some minor religious text written by an obscure sect. Archaeological evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls has revealed something remarkable. The Book of Jubilees was preserved in more copies at Qumran than almost any other non-biblical text. 15 to 16 manuscript copies were found across 5 different caves, making it the 3rd most frequently preserved work, after only the most sacred biblical books like Psalms and Genesis. To put this in perspective, that's more copies than were found of many books that did make it into the biblical canon. The earliest physical manuscript dates to 125 to 100 BCE, placing these copies remarkably close to the original composition around 170-150 BCE. This wasn't some medieval forgery or late invention. It was demonstrably an authentic Second Temple period text that ancient Jewish communities considered equal in authority to Scripture itself. But here's where the story becomes truly intriguing. If this text was so important to ancient Jewish communities, if it was preserved with such care and in such numbers, why did it completely disappear from Western civilization for over a millennium? The answer lies in one of the most systematic acts of religious censorship in human history. To understand why religious authorities found Jubilees so threatening, we need to examine what the book actually claimed. Written by an anonymous Palestinian Jewish priest around 170-150 BCE, during the turbulent period of the Maccabean revolt against Greek oppression, Jubilees presented itself as nothing less than the complete, authoritative version of human history, from creation to the Exodus. But this wasn't simply another retelling of familiar biblical stories. The author made several revolutionary claims that would have sent shockwaves through religious establishments. First, he claimed that Moses had received far more revelation on Mount Sinai than what appeared in the canonical Torah. According to Jubilees, God had revealed to Moses the complete chronology of world history, divided into perfect periods of 49 years called Jubilees, along with detailed information about angels, demons, calendar systems, and laws that weren't included in the official biblical account. Think about the implications of this claim. If the author of Jubilees was correct, then the Bible that everyone considered complete and authoritative was actually just a condensed summary of a much larger revelation. The missing information included crucial details about the spiritual forces influencing human history, the correct way to calculate sacred time, and additional laws that God had supposedly commanded but that weren't preserved in canonical scripture. Second, The book claimed to reveal the true chronology of world history by restoring the proper Jubilee periods that had been compressed or lost in the biblical account. Where Genesis might mention that a patriarch lived for several hundred years, Jubilees would break this down into specific Jubilee periods and explain what happened during each one. It provided names for unnamed biblical characters, explained the motivations behind God's actions, and filled in gaps in the biblical narrative with detailed stories. Most provocatively, Jubilees claimed that this complete revelation had been written on heavenly tablets before the creation of the world, meaning that all of human history was predetermined and that access to these tablets provided prophetic knowledge about the future. This wasn't just claiming superior historical information, it was claiming access to divine foreknowledge that religious authorities didn't possess. Now let's examine the specific content that made religious authorities so desperate to suppress this text. The most immediately controversial material centered on the book's expanded account of the Watchers, the fallen angels mentioned briefly in Genesis 6. While the canonical Bible offers only tantalizing hints about these beings, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Jubilees provided the complete shocking story. According to Jubilees, exactly 200 angels descended to earth under the leadership of beings named Semjaza and Azazel. These weren't vague spiritual entities, they were organized beings with specific names, ranks, and areas of expertise. The text described in detail how they taught humanity forbidden knowledge that directly led to the violence and corruption that necessitated Noah's flood. But here's what made this account so explosive. The forbidden knowledge wasn't abstract spiritual concepts. Jubilee specified that the Watchers taught humans metallurgy for making weapons, cosmetics and jewelry for vanity, astrology and divination for predicting the future, medicine and healing arts and various forms of magic and sorcery. In other words, much of what we consider human civilization, technology, medicine, astronomy, chemistry, was portrayed as forbidden knowledge given by fallen angels. Think about how threatening this narrative would be to religious authorities. It suggested that human learning and scientific advancement were fundamentally connected to demonic influence. For church leaders trying to establish Christianity as compatible with Roman civilization and Greek learning, this posed an enormous problem. How could they encourage education and cultural engagement while maintaining that such knowledge originated with fallen angels? The implications became even more troubling when Jubilees revealed that this forbidden knowledge didn't die with the flood. In a particularly controversial passage, the text described how Canaan, a descendant of Noah, discovered pre-flood astrological knowledge carved on stone by the Watchers. Instead of destroying it, Canaan transcribed this information and thereby perpetuated the forbidden wisdom into the post-flood world. This suggested that occult knowledge continued to influence human civilization through hidden transmission, a concept that would have terrified religious authorities trying to maintain control over spiritual and intellectual life. Perhaps even more threatening than the Watchers' narrative was Jubilee's introduction of a systematic demonology that provided alternative explanations for evil and suffering. The text introduced a figure called Mastema, meaning hostility, who controlled 1/10 of the evil spirits left after the flood and served as humanity's primary spiritual adversary. Unlike the Satan figure who appears only briefly in the Hebrew Bible, Mastema was portrayed as actively manipulating human history throughout the biblical narrative. According to Jubilees, Mastema was responsible for instigating God's command for Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, for hardening Pharaoh's heart during the Egyptian plagues, and for inspiring the golden calf incident at Mount Sinai. This systematic demonology suggested that many events attributed to divine will in the canonical Bible were actually demonic manipulations. Consider how revolutionary this framework was. Instead of accepting suffering and evil as mysterious aspects of God's plan, Jubilees provided detailed explanations rooted in ongoing spiritual warfare between divine and demonic forces. This appealed to ordinary believers who struggled with questions about why bad things happen to good people, but it also challenged religious authorities' exclusive role as interpreters of divine will. The book described 4 distinct classes of angels with specific hierarchies and functions. presented detailed accounts of angelic intervention in human affairs, and claimed that much of biblical history could only be properly understood through this supernatural lens. For religious leaders trying to establish systematic theology and institutional authority, this alternative spiritual framework posed a direct threat to their interpretive monopoly. Hidden within Jubilees was perhaps the most politically explosive element of all, a completely different calendar system that would have revolutionized religious observance and undermined established religious authority. The text mandated a strict 364-day solar calendar with 4 perfect quarters of 91 days each, ensuring that all festivals would fall on the same weekdays every year. To understand why this was so threatening, we need to grasp how religious authority actually functioned in the ancient world. Control over sacred time meant control over religious life itself. Religious leaders maintained their authority partly by determining when communities would observe festivals, fasts, and holy days. If you controlled the calendar, you controlled when people gathered for worship, when they made pilgrimages, when they paid religious taxes, and when they participated in community celebrations. Jubilees directly challenged this system by claiming that God had revealed the true calendar at creation itself, eliminating any legitimate human authority over time reckoning. The text explicitly attacked lunar-based calendars used by established authorities, stating that those who followed such systems would disturb the year and make a day of testimony worthless and a profane day of festival. Think about the practical implications. If communities adopted Jubilees' solar calendar, they could no longer celebrate Passover, Day of Atonement, and other major festivals simultaneously with the Jerusalem Temple or mainstream Jewish communities. This would effectively create separate religious societies that operated independently of established religious authority. The book presented this calendar system as an unchangeable divine ordinance, with severe spiritual consequences for those who deviated from it. Communities following Jubilees' calendar would literally be living in different sacred time than everyone else, making unified religious observance impossible. Archaeological evidence shows that the Qumran community structured their entire religious life around Jubilees' solar system, effectively separating themselves from mainstream Judaism. For religious authorities, this represented an existential threat. If believers could determine sacred time through their own reading of Jubilees rather than through institutional guidance, what else might they decide to interpret independently? Beyond its calendar controversy, Jubilees contained legal prescriptions that religious authorities found dangerously extreme and impractical. The text prescribed death penalties for violations not specified in canonical scripture, including death by stoning for fathers who permitted intermarriage with Gentiles and burning for daughters who married outside the covenant community. These weren't metaphorical warnings or spiritual consequences. They were specific legal instructions that exceeded even the strictest interpretations of biblical law. The book introduced ritual requirements not found anywhere in canonical texts, specifying exact types of wood for burnt offerings, mandating wreaths during the Feast of Tabernacles, and requiring worshippers to carry branches around the altar 7 times each morning during festivals. But perhaps most problematically for early Christian authorities, Jubilees promoted complete separation from Gentiles in ways that directly conflicted with Christianity's missionary expansion. While Christianity was developing its inclusive message for all nations, Jubilees taught that interaction with non-covenant peoples was fundamentally corrupting and required extreme measures to prevent. Consider the timing. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, church leaders needed to establish their faith as compatible with diverse cultural contexts. They needed to show that Christianity could embrace converts from all backgrounds and adapt to different social situations. Jubilees' xenophobic theology directly contradicted this universalist direction. The text's expanded purity laws created additional barriers that would have made normal social interaction virtually impossible. Enhanced genealogical restrictions for marriage, additional dietary laws beyond biblical requirements, and separation requirements that exceeded any practical implementation threatened to create permanent schisms within religious communities. The destruction of Jubilees represents one of history's most systematic and successful censorship campaigns. By the 4th century CE, Christianity had transformed from a persecuted minority to the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine and his successors. This dramatic change brought new challenges. Religious authorities now faced the task of establishing orthodox doctrine for a rapidly expanding, diverse religious movement that spanned multiple cultures and languages. Texts like Jubilees, with their sectarian origins and alternative religious systems, represented serious threats to the unified Christianity that imperial authorities demanded. Church leaders couldn't afford to have different communities following different calendars, observing different laws, or accepting different accounts of biblical history. Unity required the elimination of competing authorities. The suppression began with formal exclusion from biblical canons. The Council of Rome in 382 CE under Pope Damasus established biblical canons that excluded Jubilees, followed by the Councils of Carthage in 397 and 419 CE that confirmed these decisions. While many early church fathers, including Epiphanius, Justin Martyr, and Origen, had cited Jubilees extensively in their writings, the 4th century ecclesiastical establishment ultimately classified it as dangerous pseudepigrapha, false writings that falsely claimed apostolic or prophetic authority. But the Church didn't stop with mere exclusion from the canon. Historical records confirm that Jubilees was so thoroughly suppressed in the 4th century that no complete Hebrew, Greek, or Latin version has survived in the Mediterranean world. This wasn't accidental loss due to the passage of time. It was deliberate elimination by religious authorities who found the text's content intolerable. The suppression was remarkably effective. Even the Greek translation was lost, despite Greek being the primary scholarly language of early Christianity. Only fragments survived in Latin, representing perhaps 25% of the original text. The systematic nature of this elimination suggests coordinated efforts across different regions and communities to erase the text from Christian consciousness. Jewish communities also participated in the suppression, though for different reasons. Post-exilic Judaism had adopted lunar calendar systems that conflicted with Jubilees' solar calendar, making the text impractical for mainstream Jewish observance. Rabbinical literature shows no evidence of canonical acceptance, and later rabbis actively discouraged its use. What makes the story of Jubilees truly remarkable is how it survived complete elimination through one of history's most unlikely preservation efforts. While Western Christianity was systematically destroying every copy it could find, the text lived on in one of the most isolated Christian communities in the world, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Ethiopian Christianity had developed somewhat independently from Mediterranean Christianity, maintaining certain ancient traditions and texts that were lost elsewhere. Before the 6th century CE, Ethiopian scholars had translated Jubilees into Ge'ez, the classical language of Ethiopian literature. When the suppression campaign eliminated the text from the Western world, Ethiopian Christians preserved every word across more than a millennium of relative isolation. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church didn't just preserve Jubilees as a historical curiosity. They maintained it as part of their 81-book biblical canon, considering it genuine scripture with the same authority as Genesis or Exodus. For over 1,400 years, while the Western world had completely forgotten this text, Ethiopian Christians continued reading it, copying it, and incorporating its teachings into their religious life. The rediscovery began in the 1840s, when European scholars first encountered complete Ethiopian manuscripts and realized they had found a lost piece of ancient Jewish literature. Initial scholarly reaction was skeptical. How could such an important ancient text have survived only in Ethiopia? Some scholars questioned whether the Ethiopian version was authentic or whether it might be a later composition. These doubts were completely shattered by the 1947 Dead Sea Scrolls discovery, which provided dramatic confirmation of both the text's ancient origins and the accuracy of the Ethiopian preservation. When scholars found 15 to 16 Hebrew manuscript copies of Jubilees across 5 different caves at Qumran, they realized that Ethiopian Christians had maintained a remarkably faithful translation of an authentically ancient text. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovery represents one of the most important archaeological finds in human history, and its vindication of Jubilees adds a particularly dramatic chapter to that story. When Bedouin shepherds discovered the first cave in 1947, they had no idea they were about to revolutionize our understanding of Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity. As scholars began examining the Qumran manuscripts, they discovered something extraordinary about the community that had preserved them. These weren't just any Jewish sectarians, they were a group that had structured their entire religious life around alternative texts that mainstream Judaism had rejected. And at the center of their alternative canon was the Book of Jubilees. The archaeological evidence was stunning. Not only had the Qumran community preserved multiple copies of Jubilees, but they had made it fundamental to their religious practice. Evidence suggests they followed Jubilees' solar calendar system, observed its expanded festival requirements, and accepted its alternative chronology of biblical history. This wasn't casual interest in an interesting text. It was complete adoption of an alternative religious system. Carbon dating and paleographic analysis of the manuscripts confirmed what scholars had barely dared to hope. The Hebrew fragments were authentic Second Temple period documents that validated the accuracy of the Ethiopian translation. Modern readers could access the complete text that 4th century authorities had tried to destroy, confirmed by archaeological discovery to be genuine ancient literature. The Qumran evidence also revealed why 4th century authorities had found Jubilees so threatening. Here was proof that alternative Jewish communities had indeed organized their entire religious lives around this text, creating separate calendar systems, festival observances, and interpretive frameworks that operated independently of established religious authority. The ancient sectarian threat that had motivated the suppression campaign was real. The rediscovery of Jubilees has created a perfect storm of appeal for contemporary readers interested in biblical mysteries and hidden knowledge. Unlike modern conspiracy theories or New Age inventions, Jubilees represents genuine hidden knowledge that was systematically removed from mainstream religious consciousness by documented historical authorities. This authenticity is crucial to understanding the text's modern appeal. We're not dealing with speculation about what might have been suppressed. We have archaeological evidence of successful religious censorship. The combination of ancient authenticity and documented suppression creates exactly the kind of mysterious, forbidden text that captivates readers seeking alternatives to institutional religious authority. For readers fascinated by angel lore and supernatural narratives, Jubilees provides the most detailed ancient account of fallen angels and their interaction with humanity. The book's systematic demonology and descriptions of pre-flood civilizations appeal to those interested in alternative prehistory and lost ancient wisdom. Unlike modern angel mythologies that lack historical grounding, Jubilees offers supernatural narratives with genuine ancient credentials. The calendar controversy resonates powerfully with modern audiences questioning institutional religious authority. Jubilees claim that established churches and synagogues follow fundamentally incorrect calendar systems appeals to those seeking religious alternatives outside mainstream denominations. The text's positioning as superior to canonical scripture attracts readers who believe religious authorities have hidden or corrupted original biblical truth. Modern marketing explicitly emphasizes Jubilees' status as banned, suppressed, or hidden scripture, positioning it alongside other pseudepigraphic texts in collections of lost books of the Bible. Publishers target audiences interested in recovering supposedly suppressed religious knowledge, emphasizing the text's exclusion from mainstream canons as evidence of its dangerous truth rather than its sectarian origins. Even modern readers approaching Jubilees with knowledge of its ancient origins and historical context often find certain passages genuinely shocking in their implications. Chapter 6 contains what may be the most explicit calendar polemic in ancient literature, directly attacking lunar-based systems as corruptions that disturb the year and make a day of testimony worthless. This wasn't merely advocating for calendar reform, it was declaring that mainstream Judaism and Christianity were fundamentally wrong about sacred time itself. The systematic demonology in chapters 10 and 48-49 presents spiritual warfare in terms that many contemporary readers find more compelling than traditional Christian theology. Unlike canonical scripture's occasional references to spiritual conflict, Jubilees provides detailed accounts of how supernatural forces manipulate historical events. Modern readers often find this framework more satisfying than conventional explanations for evil and suffering. Chapter 30's account of the Dinah incident prescribes death penalties for intermarriage that exceed anything in canonical law. The passage mandates stoning for fathers who permit their daughters to marry Gentiles and burning for the daughters themselves, legal prescriptions that even conservative modern readers find disturbing. These extreme positions illustrate why early Christian authorities found the text impossible to reconcile with Christianity's missionary expansion. The expanded patriarchal narratives also contain elements that challenge traditional religious understanding. Abraham's burning of his father's idol temple at age 60, his control over ravens through divine power, and his specific 10 trials versus the traditional 7 provide alternative versions of foundational religious stories that conflict with established tradition. Perhaps most provocatively, chapters 4 and 8 contain detailed accounts of forbidden pre-flood knowledge and its post-flood transmission. These passages don't just describe what the Watchers taught humanity, they explain how this knowledge survived the flood through written transmission and continued to influence civilization through hidden wisdom traditions. This narrative framework suggests that occult knowledge has legitimate ancient origins and continued spiritual significance. The modern scholarly study of Jubilees has revolutionized our understanding of Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity in ways that extend far beyond the text itself. Academic research has revealed that what we often think of as mainstream Judaism and Christianity in the ancient world was actually much more diverse and contested than traditional accounts suggest. James van der Kam, the leading academic authority on Jubilees, has demonstrated through detailed textual analysis that the Ethiopian translation preserved the ancient text with remarkable accuracy. This means that modern readers can access not just fragments or reconstructions, but the complete ancient work that religious authorities tried to eliminate. The implications for understanding ancient religious diversity are enormous. Scholarly research has also revealed the extent to which Jubilees influenced other ancient texts and traditions. Elements of Jubilees chronology appear in later Jewish and Christian literature, suggesting that its influence continued even after official suppression. The text's calendar system influenced other sectarian communities, and its demonology provided frameworks for later apocalyptic literature. The academic vindication of Jubilees has inadvertently enhanced its appeal to alternative religious audiences by confirming both its authentic ancient origins and its systematic suppression. When scholars provide archaeological validation that this was indeed a significant Second Temple period text that religious authorities deliberately eliminated, they lend credibility to broader theories about institutional religious censorship and hidden spiritual knowledge. Universities now offer entire courses on Second Temple literature that include Jubilees as essential reading, and academic conferences regularly feature sessions on its historical significance. This scholarly acceptance provides intellectual legitimacy for readers who might otherwise be dismissed as pursuing fringe interests. Understanding the modern appeal of Jubilees requires appreciating the unique perspective of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which never considered this text suppressed or forbidden because they never stopped reading it. For Ethiopian Christians, Jubilees isn't a mysterious lost text. It's simply part of their biblical canon that other churches inexplicably rejected. This ongoing canonical acceptance provides a fascinating contrast to Western fascination with the text as hidden knowledge. Ethiopian Orthodox theology has incorporated Jubilees' calendar system, chronology, and expanded biblical narratives into their systematic religious understanding in ways that Western Christianity never attempted. The Ethiopian perspective also highlights how cultural isolation can preserve ancient traditions that more connected communities abandon under external pressure. While Mediterranean Christianity was adapting to Roman imperial requirements and Greek philosophical frameworks, Ethiopian Christianity maintained certain ancient Jewish Christian traditions, including acceptance of texts like Jubilees and the Book of Enoch. Contemporary Ethiopian Orthodox scholars often express bewilderment at Western excitement over these rediscovered texts, since they never disappeared from Ethiopian religious life. This perspective provides valuable insight into how religious authority functions differently in different cultural contexts, and how institutional decisions in one region don't necessarily determine outcomes globally. The story of Jubilees' suppression and rediscovery illuminates fundamental questions about how religious authority actually works and what happens when institutions feel threatened by alternative sources of spiritual legitimacy. The 4th century campaign to eliminate Jubilees wasn't simply about theological disagreement. It was about maintaining institutional control over religious life in a period of rapid social and political change. The success of the suppression campaign demonstrates the enormous power that religious institutions wielded in the pre-modern world. The ability to eliminate a text so completely that it disappeared from entire civilizations for over a millennium required coordinated effort across multiple regions, languages, and communities. This wasn't casual censorship. It was systematic elimination that required significant institutional resources and authority. But the ultimate failure of the suppression campaign, through Ethiopian preservation and archaeological rediscovery, also demonstrates the limits of institutional control. Ideas and texts that meet genuine spiritual needs tend to survive even systematic attempts at elimination, often through unexpected channels and in unexpected forms. The modern reception of Jubilees suggests that contemporary religious institutions face similar challenges to their ancient predecessors. In an era of global communication and easy access to diverse religious texts, institutional gatekeeping becomes much more difficult. Readers can now access suppressed texts directly and make their own judgments about their value and authenticity. The enduring appeal of texts like Jubilees to contemporary audiences reveals something important about modern religious psychology and the relationship between institutional authority and individual spiritual seeking. In an age when traditional religious institutions have lost much of their cultural authority, alternative sources of spiritual knowledge become more attractive to those who feel that mainstream denominations have become too accommodating to secular culture. Jubilees appeals to readers who suspect that religious authorities have deliberately hidden or corrupted original spiritual truth. The documented historical suppression provides factual foundation for these suspicions, making broader conspiracy theories about religious censorship seem more plausible. When you can prove that church authorities successfully eliminated an ancient text for over 1,400 years, claims about other suppressed knowledge gain credibility. The text also satisfies contemporary fascination with alternative history and hidden wisdom traditions. Unlike modern New Age inventions that lack historical grounding, Jubilees offers alternative biblical narratives with genuine ancient credentials. Readers can explore alternative chronologies, supernatural explanations, and esoteric knowledge while maintaining connection to authentic historical traditions. The mathematical precision of Jubilees' chronological framework particularly appeals to readers seeking hidden patterns in historical events. The text division of time into 49-year Jubilee periods offers systematic alternatives to conventional biblical chronology that suggest deeper spiritual meanings behind historical developments. While Jubilees hasn't achieved the same level of influence on modern esoteric movements as texts like the Book of Enoch, its impact on contemporary alternative religious thinking has been significant and growing. The combination of authentic ancient origins, documented suppression, and comprehensive alternative religious system makes it attractive to various movements seeking alternatives to mainstream Christianity. Modern alternative Bible compilations increasingly include Jubilees alongside other pseudepigraphic texts, marketing them to audiences seeking religious alternatives outside traditional denominations. Publishers emphasize the text's systematic suppression as evidence that established religious authorities have hidden crucial spiritual knowledge from believers. Contemporary calendar reform movements sometimes draw on Jubilees' solar calendar system as evidence for alternative approaches to sacred time. Some groups use the text's chronological framework for prophetic interpretation or historical analysis that differs from mainstream biblical scholarship. The text's detailed demonology and supernatural narratives also influence contemporary spiritual warfare theology and alternative Christianity that emphasizes ongoing conflict between divine and demonic forces. Some readers find Jubilees' systematic explanation of evil more satisfying than traditional Christian theodicy. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovery didn't just vindicate the authenticity of Jubilees, it revealed the extent to which alternative Jewish communities had organized their entire religious lives around texts that mainstream Judaism rejected. The Qumran evidence shows that what we often think of as orthodox or mainstream, ancient Judaism, was actually one option among several competing religious systems. The archaeological context demonstrates that Jubilees wasn't just an interesting theological speculation. It was the foundation for alternative Jewish religious practice that included different calendar systems, festival observances, legal requirements, and interpretive frameworks. The Qumran community represents a living example of what religious authorities feared: a functional alternative religious system based on texts they considered dangerous. This archaeological validation provides crucial context for understanding why 4th century authorities felt compelled to eliminate Jubilees completely. They weren't just dealing with abstract theological disagreement, they were confronting evidence that alternative texts could indeed serve as foundations for separate religious communities that operated independently of established authority. The preservation of multiple manuscript copies across different caves also suggests that Jubilees was widely circulated and highly valued among alternative Jewish communities. This wasn't a text that only specialists read, it was popular literature that ordinary believers used for religious instruction and spiritual guidance. The story of Jubilees reveals one of history's great ironies. Religious authorities' very success in suppressing this text has made it more compelling to modern alternative religious seekers than it might have been if it had simply remained in continuous circulation. The book's status as banned and suppressed scripture has become its primary selling point, transforming historical sectarian controversy into contemporary spiritual authenticity. Consider how different the modern reception might have been if Jubilees had remained part of Western Christian tradition throughout the medieval period. It would likely be seen as just another ancient text with certain interesting but outdated perspectives, rather than as hidden knowledge that powerful institutions felt compelled to destroy. The suppression created exactly the kind of mystery and forbidden knowledge narrative that appeals to contemporary readers. Suspicious of institutional religious authority, by trying to eliminate dangerous ideas, ancient religious establishments inadvertently created the conditions that make those same ideas irresistible to modern audiences. The rediscovery through Ethiopian preservation and archaeological find also adds dramatic narrative elements that enhance the text's appeal. The story reads like a spiritual thriller: ancient conspiracy, successful cover-up, miraculous preservation in exotic location, dramatic archaeological vindication. These elements make Jubilees compelling even apart from its actual content. The Book of Jubilees ultimately raises fundamental questions about the nature of religious authority and spiritual truth that remain relevant today. If ancient religious authorities could successfully eliminate a text for over a millennium, what other important spiritual knowledge might have been lost or suppressed? If communities could organize their entire religious lives around alternative scriptures, what does this say about claims of exclusive religious truth? The text's rediscovery forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how religious canons were actually formed and what factors influence decisions about which texts to preserve and which to eliminate. The process clearly wasn't just about spiritual discernment. Political, cultural, and institutional considerations played crucial roles in determining which religious ideas survived and which disappeared. For contemporary readers, Jubilees represents both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity lies in accessing authentic ancient spiritual traditions that were previously unavailable due to historical suppression. The challenge lies in evaluating these traditions thoughtfully, rather than simply accepting them because they were suppressed or rejecting them because they contradict established teachings. The story of Jubilees stands as testament both to the power of religious institutions to shape spiritual consciousness and to the ultimate impossibility of completely eliminating ideas whose time has come. What 4th century authorities deemed too dangerous for public consumption has become, through the accidents of preservation and archaeological discovery, accessible to any modern reader with internet access and spiritual curiosity. In our current era of global communication and easy access to diverse religious texts, the lessons of Jubilees become particularly relevant. Religious authority can no longer depend on controlling access to information. It must prove its value through the quality of its interpretive guidance and spiritual wisdom. The age of successful religious censorship is over, but the age of spiritual seeking continues, and texts like Jubilees will undoubtedly continue to fascinate readers, drawn to authentic ancient alternatives to conventional religious understanding. The Book of Jubilees reminds us that religious history is far more complex and contested than institutional accounts typically suggest, and that spiritual truth has always been more diverse and difficult to contain than any single tradition wants to admit. Whether readers approach it as historical curiosity, spiritual inspiration, or dangerous deception, they encounter a text that challenges comfortable assumptions about religious authority and invites deeper questions about the nature of spiritual truth itself.